On the Neurosurgery Journey. Here on episode, I think we're at 15 now, so had a busy couple of months streaming every Thursday. Um, Grateful to have Chandler Berke, a medical student, one of my colleagues here at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, who just got back from the AANS 2023 conference out in Los Angeles, right? Out in Cali.
Yeah.
Nice. So she's going to share a little bit about her experiences, what AANS was like. And actually, she was also at the CNS in the fall. So we're going to hear a little bit about how those two meetings compared. And just in general, a little bit about why meetings are important for medical students going into neurosurgery. So thanks for joining, Chandler.
Thanks for having me, Mike. So as he said, I went to both the CNS and the AANS. And interestingly, they were both in California this year. So if you're from the East Coast like myself, quite a hike to get there. So the conference officially started on Friday, the 21st, but Thursday evening on the 20th, they had a few events for medical students, similar to kind of how they'd had the swimming with sharks at CNS. So I had my neurology shelf exam because the life of the student, you're never not taking exams. So I left after my exam on Friday evening. So I unfortunately missed those sessions. However, I know that some attendings like Dr. Mike Ivan, Dr. Dan Agarwal were able to speak, and they were giving some very helpful insight to, applying to residency, how to get mentorship. And both Mike and I were fortunate enough to attend the med student town hall at the CNS, which kind of spoke to similar themes. And I know Mike and I were discussing that CNS has previously had sessions like this, where I think this might be kind of newer for the AANS, which is great to see them kind of targeting some stuff towards medical students. So even though I missed that session, there was still a lot of benefit to going to the AANS, because especially after COVID, a lot of us were connecting with attendings and residents remotely from different universities across the country. And it's always great. We have Zoom, we have webinars, but being able to either introduce yourself for the first time or follow up again in person is always very helpful. It gives them, kind of like a reboost, like, wow, the student traveled all the way here to come to the AANS. They're obviously very serious about neurosurgery and applying to neurosurgery, which is always helpful. And then, which happened to us, if you're kind of near a group of other attendings, they'll give you a little introduction so you have another easy way in to have some more contacts to pursue for if you need a research year, if you're applying there for residency. So just even the FaceTime itself is very helpful. And then beyond, networking, there's the exhibit hall, which at both CNS and AANS, I have to say, is probably my favorite part.
That's where you get all the free stuff.
Exactly. All the free stuff, which I traveled just to carry on. So I had to limit what I took back. But all the stuff that you can't really touch in the operating room, they let you get a little hands-on there. They have the Stryker Lab, which is a mobile bus that actually does go cross country. It's like a cadaver lab. And at CNS, we were able to do kind of a skull-based session. And then at AANS, they had a spine session, and they had some pretty cool, similar kind of idea to, if anyone knows the CUSA for like tumor removal, they have similar technology now where they're trying to use it for cutting for the spine, which is very cool. So we got to get hands-on with that. And then they had this big session called the plenary, where they had actually Roger Goodell speak, and they had J.J. Abrams, who is trivial to Star Trek and Star Wars and everything like that. So always cool to get some outside perspectives that aren't neurosurgery.
Yeah. So Roger Goodell, like the football guy.
Like the football guy.
Interesting. Okay.
Very interesting. So I always wonder how they choose, who comes and talks. Obviously very different from neurosurgery, but they always find a way to tie it back in and find similarities.
Yeah. Did he talk about, the whole concussion controversy? Because, he was pretty central to that, right?
Yeah. So I think so. So we missed his session because we were in some of the actual cerebrovascular and tumor session talks. Gotcha. But he actually garnered a lot of attention because when we were in our individual talk rooms, they were quite empty during the time that he was giving his plenary talks. We figured maybe we made a mistake by missing it. And then J.J. Abrams spoke a lot about the technology that they use to film their movies, which he kept relating back to all the up and coming technology in neurosurgery, which I'm sure as he was walking through the exhibit hall, he saw all the robots and the augmented reality tools. So that was very cool. It was a cool tie-in. And then in the rooms, I'll say it's just you're exposed to a lot of research that sure you could scour PubMed, but some of it you're hearing like for the very first time before papers are even published because you're hearing students or residents or fellows give abstracts, presentations. Other times I was in a room where the attendings were asked to talk on a specific subject. So rather than just presenting a particular study that they did, they kind of looped in a whole, conglomerate of studies just to hit on some of those topics. Like in the tumor section room, for example, they talked about kind of the lack thereof of the molecular markers for GBM and kind of how that needs to be a larger area of research because so far any of the clinical trials that they've done, they've kind of failed to prove, a clinical link to anything in particular to target. But Dr. Komatar and Dr. Ivan from Miami hit on kind of surgical techniques for glioblastomas and vestibular schwannomas, kind of pushing people to push the envelope with doing gross total resection instead of just near total resection, which was as students very interesting to hear because if you're at a facility that doesn't do a lot of awake craniotomies, whereas Miami is one of the biggest in the country, if not the biggest, I believe, for awake cranies, you're not doing as much gross total resection as they are there. And so that was interesting to hear the stats on that. But conversely, for schwannomas, they're actually saying that sometimes trying to spare the facial nerve and, preserve House-Brackman scores by doing a near total resection actually later on can have a bit of a detrimental effect because if the tumor is fast growing and it grows back, then in the end, you're subjecting the patient to more surgeries when in the end, they are ending up with hearing loss and a worse House-Brackman score anyway. So that was very interesting to hear. And then my classmate from Rutgers gave a talk, a few talks actually. So it's just cool because you're seeing people that either you're working alongside and now you're across the country or you're meeting students for the first time and now you have connects to go home and push papers out with. So just a lot of networking, a lot of learning, and it's all very inspiring.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is like you're getting a pulse on where the field is going. Totally. That, again, like you said, you can keep up with PubMed. I mean, I get emails from like all the journals and I try to like glance at the table of contents, right? Because that's really all you can do as a student on the schedule. Yeah. And even then, it's hard to really keep up with and have that, feeling at least of where the field is going. You kind of just read it. So that's super cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we had a couple of comments here, so about the cool non-neurosurgical speakers. So that is always a perk of going to these conferences, and I think that's something with neurosurgery too. Even though it's a small field, it's a field that it has so much kind of mystique to it, and the whole joke of it's not brain surgery. That anytime people get to be in front of a group of neurosurgeons,
right.
I think they're a little bit more interested in doing that.
Totally.
So neurosurgical conferences always get some of the best speakers. I think like Michelle Obama was speaking at one like a couple of years ago, or was supposed to speak at one a couple of years ago. Yeah, so you get some big names for sure.
Yeah, well, because J.J. Abrams is one of the most famous people, and he was sitting there. He's like, so I'm going to talk about technology, but I'm sitting in a room of people who are brilliant and probably don't need to hear it from me. But it's just such a different perspective that it's interesting for the neurosurgeons here, and to him, they think it's so cool to come and talk. So it's like a good back and forth, mutually beneficial to have them come and speak. And when they have it in locations like Los Angeles, someone like who's very involved in filmmaking, it's obviously an easier link to come there. Instead of next year, I think it'll be in Chicago, and then CNS will be in DC. So they kind of get you going all over the place.
Yeah, and I think the CNS does have some kind of like policy advocacy type speakers who are going to talk about that work. So I do like how they always keep it, somewhat in line with where the location of the meeting is. So
yeah,
cool.
Totally.
So did you present some of your own work there, or what was that like?
Yeah, so we didn't have oral presentations; we had posters. So this was a first for the AANS because just like how when we were at CNS, they had oral presentations, the traditional poster, and then e-posters were a separate category.
Gotcha.
Last year at AANS, they had same traditional posters and then e-posters. This year, they actually, at AANS, they got rid of traditional posters entirely. And it was
Mm.
either a few people gave traditional talks, and then the rest of the people had e-posters, which I'm not sure, I don't know the reasoning behind that. But I will say that it definitely is nice to have the traditional posters, because how they had it there was you'd have to go in and search in your poster name to pull it up. And if you had multiple posters, you had to keep maybe putting your name in, and they closed the
Right.
exhibit hall early. So some
Okay.
of us didn't even get a picture with our poster. Whereas at CNS, it was a whole outside room that they had all the
Mhm.
posters up, so you didn't have to worry about the exhibit hall closing. So I think it's nice in the sense that if you got awarded an e-poster instead of a traditional poster, you don't have to feel like there's any difference in caliber. Everyone has the same delivery of poster, but it's also nice to have the traditional poster, which is actually J.J. Abrams was talking about how the movie going experience is something that Americans need. You need to be in rooms having popcorn
Mhm.
instead of just, home on Netflix, which is, I kind of feel a similar thing about posters versus e-posters. It's nice when you're standing by your poster, because we had to prepare a speech they had required when we submit our poster, like a 4-minute presentation, and then have questions ready for people, or answers rather, if people came and asked questions. But that really is more lucrative to, when people have actual physical posters and you're standing there, people are walking by and they're asking questions. There was just 2 screens for the e-posters, so we all would have had to take turns, and there was a lot of people who had posters. So that was a different experience. I guess we'll see what CNS brings. I'm not sure if this is something that all the future conferences will do, where they're going to get rid of traditional posters entirely. Obviously, it saves money and it's good for the planet. It saves the trees, which is something that we all should care about. But
Mhm.
it's definitely a different experience.
Yeah, and maybe that's something where like some of these local symposia are going to become more important. To facilitate some of that interaction, where you're able to, whether it's at your institution or like a regional conference, being able to have those traditional posters. So yeah, it is always interesting seeing how the formats change.
Yeah,
That.
exactly. I mean, as someone who is pretty afraid of public speaking, on the one end, it was a little stress relieving, but on the other end, it's a good skill to practice. So, and I
Yeah,
think having a poster is something that you worked on, you did the research. So
yeah,
it's an easier thing to present on and public speak on versus a topic that someone just randomly gave you. So,
sure.
hopefully, like you just said, the smaller, subsections of CNS and AANS, they're still doing traditional posters, which it's a smaller crowd, so they very well might. So we'll have to see, what that brings.
Definitely, definitely. Do you think you would have gone if you didn't have any of your own research to present?
I probably wouldn't have, just because of finances. It's obviously very expensive to go, and I think it varies a lot by school. Um, our school doesn't have a lot of funding resources to
Mhm.
send people across the country. You're having to pay for flights, hotels, Ubers, all of that. And it's very nice to go. And if you have the funding, and some schools are able to, whether it's half or total support, definitely take advantage of that if you can. Um, if I could go to all of them and money weren't an obstacle, I would. But if I didn't have my own posters, then I don't know that I could justify to myself, to go. Um, but it kind of depends on your school and the resources that you
Mhm.
have or that the school has. Which Another interesting point is that the CNS has free registration for students, whereas the AANS, we did get a discounted fee, which was lucky, but it was still $150 to register.
Mhm.
Again, if your school doesn't have a lot of resources to support this, and none of us have an income, obviously it's something to
Right,
think
right.
about. But it's a you know catch 22, because yeah, you're spending a lot to go there, but the networking that you're getting in return, years later, it definitely pays off. So just something to think about.
Yeah, it's definitely an investment. But I think it's important to have these conversations because I think people see like, some of the typical like neurosurgery Twitter med students that it seems like they're at every conference. And
Yeah,
it's like, do I need to be at every conference? Probably not.
right.
You can, yes, the networking is valuable, but you can still network otherwise and make use of the conferences you do go to. And I think,
Totally.
like you said, especially if financial resources aren't there and you don't have something to put on your CV as a line
Totally.
as far as like presenting research. probably not going to be as valuable. You're better off taking that weekend and just pumping out papers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was with some students who didn't have their own research, and they were just going to go,
Sure.
which great. But going forward, if you don't have something, and then especially going to sub-I season for, I think it's CNS will be this year, kind of in the middle of September. So a lot of people will be on sub-Is and they won't be going. So you definitely don't need to go to all of them. I had never been to any conferences before this fall for CNS, and I had plenty of networking through email and publications without having to go. So definitely not something that you have to do. If you can, obviously great, go if you'd like to, but it's not a end all be all if you can't go. And a lot of program directors are pretty understanding that resources are limited. So if you email them and say like, hey, wanted to come, I wasn't able to, could we connect and talk about this via Zoom? I think most of them would be more than happy to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And that's something fortunate that I think the field is moving in that direction to, try to reduce the financial barriers. We're seeing that even with virtual interviews.
Yep.
People used to talk about dropping at least 10 grand, if not more, on, the application and then the actual interview process.
Yeah.
So, it's good to hear that they're starting to understand that we're just poor med students.
Yeah. And I mean, and if you do go, I've noticed at both conferences, they do try and have food for free. Like you, at least for when we went to CNS and you went to some of the lunch talks, they had food there. And then here, just with your registration, granted, I guess it's not free, we paid $150 to go, but included in your registration were meal tickets that we could get lunch every day. And then the last day, food trucks come. So all the attendings and med students were kind of eating in the same area, which was cool.
Awesome.
So they try and, help people out where they can, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I've never went to a conference that I left disappointed that I went to. You always gain fruit from it.
Exactly.
I still have notes from like the first conference I went to that I reflect back on. Because going back to what you said, it's just that's where you get the pulse of where the field is going, especially when you're in that small, like, the tumor or the cerebrovascular trauma rooms.
Yep.
You're hearing the research.
Definitely. A lot of good notes that you take for future paper ideas. And then I say one of our attendings was saying how going to those, he gets a lot of inspiration to start pumping out papers, which again, you don't need to go. You could do them, pump out the papers without going, but definitely doesn't hurt to get some of the feel for being there.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, I want to respect your time. Any last parting thoughts?
No, but I can, if anyone has any questions, I can, I guess, link my Twitter or email or something. I'm happy to answer questions. I know that I will say there were some M1s and M2s that had gone up to some of the recently matched M4s, kind of like they were celebrities, and it became like a good buddy system for mentorship pairing. So not that I have that much insight to give because I'm just an M3, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time, and we appreciate hearing about your experience at AANS, and we'll definitely see you on here in the future.
Of course. Thanks for